Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Danny Yegan. I'm a professor of economics here at UC Berkeley and a faculty member of the Opportunity Lab. For the first 18 months of the Biden administration, I served as the chief economist of the Office of Management and Budget, where I was honored to work on the development and analysis of some of the policies we're going to discuss this afternoon. A few housekeeping items before we get started. First, the event is being recorded, and the recording will be posted online afterward. Speaker bios are available online at olab.berkeley.edu. All participants are muted, but you can type your questions and comments into the Q&A box at any time, and panelists will be able to view them and answer your questions during the discussion. And feel free to engage with us on social media at Berkeley_OLAB, where we'll be live tweeting key takeaways from the event. So I'm very excited to turn things over in a moment to our esteemed keynote speaker, Congressman and Assistant Democratic Leader, James Clyburn. Before I do, I want to say a few words about the motivation for today's event and some of what we hope to accomplish here. First, today's event was developed as part of the UC Berkeley Opportunity Lab's Place-Based Policy Initiative. For those of you unfamiliar with the Opportunity Lab, the goal of OLAB is to drive more work on priority policy research questions on economic inequality and social mobility. Our work is led by a network of about 35 faculty and graduate students at UC Berkeley across a dozen departments and schools, with the bulk of our work coming out of the economics department and also the School of Public Policy. On this initiative specifically, the Place-Based Policy Initiative is generously supported by the Smith-Richardson Foundation, and the support they provided for this work and also for the Opportunity Lab as a whole has been incredibly valuable and has supported some really important work, including some of the research you'll see today on opportunity zones from Pat and Harry. Second, I want to thank the W.E. Upjohn Institute, and in particular, Katie Bolter and Tim Bartik, for co-sponsoring this event with us and helping us to develop the panels, identify the priority questions, and in general for helping us think through this event. We'll be hearing from Tim in the second panel today. I just wanted to say thank you up front to both him and Katie. The Place-Based Policy Initiative was first developed in 2018 out of a recognition that economic inequality and opportunity in the United States was increasingly a spatial phenomenon as much as a household phenomenon. Over the last 3 decades or so, economic activity has grown increasingly concentrated in superstar cities, mostly on the coasts. And in the same way that wealth has grown concentrated in a smaller number of households, it is concentrated in a smaller and smaller number of places as well. The Place-Based Policy Initiative aims to understand both the consequences of these trends in household economic security and place, and then what kinds of tools governments can use to foster a more equitable distribution of economic opportunity across neighborhoods, across cities, across urban-rural divides, across regions of the country. It's a very broad topic. We've structured today's sessions to focus on a few high-level questions about recent place-based policy efforts at the federal level, as well as some taking place at the state and local level. And so now it is my tremendous honor and pleasure to introduce the Honorable James Clyburn, who will deliver some keynote remarks for the day and answer some of your questions. Since 1993, Assistant Leader Clyburn has represented the 6th District of South Carolina in the U.S. House of Representatives. Congressman Clyburn is the Assistant Democratic Leader in the House. He previously served in the post from 2011 to 2018 and served as House Majority Whip from 2019 to 2022, and also from 2007 to 2010. President Obama said it best when he said, Assistant Leader Clyburn is, quote, one of a handful of people who, when they speak, the entire Congress listens. Assistant Leader Clyburn has also been a national leader on directing more federal funding toward distressed areas throughout the country, and in particular on investing more in rural areas. For years, he has been an advocate for applying the persistent poverty formula to all federal investments in rural development. The formula would ensure that at least 10% of all federal rural development funds go to the roughly 400 counties where at least 20% of the population has been living in poverty for at least 30 years. It's a marquee policy initiative. It's been an active development, including during my public service, and it excited a great many of us in what's possible going forward, a great many of us at the Office of Management and Budget. So with that, welcome Assistant Leader Clyburn. Thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very, very much for having me. And thanks to all of you who are participating here today. Danny, you've been very kind with your introduction, and I am very pleased with your work on 10, 20, 30, and other areas of targeting resources into underserved communities. As all of you are aware, there has been an increased focus on Bidenomics in recent weeks as the president and his administration implement and communicate his economic policy agenda to the American people. President Biden gave a major speech on this subject in Chicago last month. Listening to that speech, I was struck by one line in particular, and I quote, "I believe every American willing to work hard should be able to say where they grew up and stay where they grew up." Lifting up struggling communities has been a priority of mine for many years. When I graduated college back in 1961, my wife and I were classmates. We sat down one day and went through the yearbook to determine what had happened to our classmates. What we found was that 82% of all of our classmates left the state of South Carolina. For far too long, communities like many of those I represent were overlooked by the federal government, and economic opportunities were denied for generations. President Biden understands, as I know all of you do, that we must make America's greatness accessible and affordable for all Americans everywhere. I have been focused on this for a long time. When President Obama took office in 2009 and we began to plot our recovery out of the Great Recession, I remembered how the New Deal was a raw deal for many of the communities I represent, excluding African-American workers from many of its benefits and flooding significant swaths of the farmland they worked with the construction of Lakes Marion and Moultrie through damming the Santee River to create electricity. So when the Recovery Act was being crafted, I insisted the resources reach long struggling communities. We came up with what we call the 10, 20, 30 formula, which required at least 10% of funds in designated accounts to be spent in persistent poverty counties, which are defined as counties that have been in poverty for at least 20% of them have been in poverty for at least 30 years. There are more than 400 such counties in America. These counties are as diverse as our country. They are majority Black in the South, majority white in Appalachia, majority Latino in the Southwest, and majority Native American in the Great Plains. Far more are represented by Republicans than by Democrats. I did a little analysis of that as well. That number is really, was 2/3 at the time we started the formula. 2/3 Republican. So this is nothing partisan. The Recovery Act applied the 10, 20, 30 formula to 3 rural development accounts: the Rural Community Facilities Program account, the Rural Business Program account, and the Rural Water and Waste Disposable Program account. That was because they wanted to see how it would work. Well, the results were impressive. According to the Department of Agriculture, the 10-20-30 formula was responsible for funding 4,655 projects, totaling nearly $1.7 billion in persistent poverty counties. These projects ranged from drinking water infrastructure in my home county of Orangeburg to a public safety building in New Matrix County, Missouri, to a green administration building for a tribal housing authority in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. Following the success of the 10-20-30 formula in the Recovery Act, we got to work on expanding it to programs throughout the federal government. I worked with Republicans like Joanne Emerson of Missouri, Harold Rogers of Kentucky, when he chaired the Appropriations Committee, and former Speaker Paul Ryan. We increased the number of accounts subject to the 10-20-30 formula from the 3 in the Recovery Act to 15 for the past several years. Billions of federal dollars have been invested under these provisions. The benefits have continued. Funded by USDA Community Facilities Grant, the Bamberg-Bonneville Emergency Medical Center opened in 2019 in rural South Carolina, filling an essential need in 2 communities where one hospital closed in 2012 and another closed in 2016. Roosevelt County Electric Cooperative in New Mexico took advantage of the formula's application to the Department of Agriculture rural electrification loans to improve reliability and affordability. And the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians received a $1.4 million water and waste disposal grant to improve the water infrastructure on their reservation. A more recent investment by the Economic Development Administration at the Department of Commerce illustrates the promise of these targeted investments in persistent poverty counties. An EDA grant of nearly $4 million awarded last year to Panola County, Mississippi, will support the county, and I'm quoting the department here, with renovating a former outlet mall building for use as a workforce training center that will serve North Mississippi. The project will establish the concourse, a vocational and technical training facility that will work to meet local employers' existing and future workforce needs. Once completed, the project will help generate an environment that can serve as a catalyst for unprecedented regional economic growth. End of quote. That is what the 10-20-30 formula is all about. Our work to target funds to distressed communities hasn't stopped with the 10-20-30 formula focused on persistent poverty counties. We recognize that county poverty rates are not necessarily the best metric by which to assess the level of need in urban areas. Working with Barbara Lee, your member of Congress in Berkeley, as well as Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey, we developed an approach that could also target or set aside funds to high poverty census tracts in rural, urban, and suburban communities alike. This approach is already bearing fruit as well. In the fiscal year 2023 appropriations bill, $20 million in raised grant funding at the Department of Transportation was set aside for investments in either persistent poverty counties or high poverty census tracts. Now, I want to point out here that $20 million is to supplement raise grants. This is to focus on these counties. That's not all of the raise grants money. In fact, a $22.8 million raise grant was awarded to Orangeburg, South Carolina, to build a pedestrian bridge and multimodal transit hub in that county to connect downtown Orangeburg with surrounding neighborhoods and 2 HBCUs. One, my alma mater, South Carolina State, and Claflin. This investment will be transformational for that community. And what happened in this instance is that when they decided on the raise grants, what they did was they looked at this formula and applied the formula to supplement. Took some of that $20 million to supplement other allocations and made this program eligible. As Danny knows well, from his time at OMB, we have been working to target resources to communities in need across the entire federal government, while recognizing that different targeted measures will work better for different programs. Last Congress, with Danny's assistance and support, we developed and introduced the Targeting Resources to Communities in Need Act, which will direct OMB to work with agencies to take steps to better target funds to struggling communities and to report to Congress on the steps that they have taken and the results that they have had. Senator Booker and I introduced this legislation on a bipartisan basis last year with Harold Rogers in the House and Rob Portman in the Senate. It passed the House and was marked up in the Senate. It came up short of being enacted into law, but our work continues. Regrettably, the current speaker has not been as supportive as Speaker Ryan was. Even so, we have achieved remarkable progress. This gathering is a testament to that. The foundational premise of 10-20-30 is identical to that of today's gathering. Place matters. We cannot help struggling Americans unless we help the communities they call home. Ignoring that fact is harmful, not just to economic success, but to our very social fabric. We have a president of the United States who understands that. And we have innovative academics like yourselves who understand that. Thank you for the work you are doing on this issue. And thank you again for having me. I look forward to your questions and to working with you to fulfill President Biden's vision of a country where every American willing to work should be able to say where they grew up and stay where they grew up. Thank you, and I'll be glad to entertain your questions.
Thank you so much, Assistant Leader. There could not have been a better way to start off our program. Thank you so much. And I've collected some questions from our attendees. We have over 200 in attendance here from academia, from think tanks, from policy staffs in Washington and elsewhere. And I know people can't wait to hear more from you before you have to go. So if you don't mind, I'll start off with a question and then we'll move down that list. It was extraordinary for me to hear. I know the history, but to hear from you again of how ideas in Washington result in major grants on the ground in so many distressed areas. Looking ahead, what do you think it would take for the Targeting Resources to Communities in Need Act and similar legislation to follow the same formula, going from impossible to improbable to inevitable? Is there more research that would help? Are there political barriers? Will earmarks help? How do you see the path forward?
Well, it'll be all of the above. I do believe that there are some barriers, of course. When you target resources like this, there's always a fight between the needy communities and the communities that's got influence. And that's always a real battle. And there's always a battle between those people who think, like I do, that Congress is here and Congress people to respond to their community's needs. And I'm a big earmark person. I do believe that earmarking got out of hand several years ago. But I grew up in a parsonage, and my father was a minister. And I tell people all the time, one of the first meetings I ever remember eavesdropping on in my home was when my dad and his presbytery was debating the frock and the minister. They didn't burn the church down or nailed up the church. They got rid of the minister. So my whole thing is when you have problems with earmarking, get rid of the problem, not get rid of the program. Because when a congressperson go, like I was in Charleston last night, and I met with 250 Charlestonians, most of whom had moved away. In fact, it was the Washington Club. It's the Charleston Club of Washington, having their 75th anniversary in Charleston, South Carolina. I went to the anniversary, and they all talked about how things have changed since they went away. And there are people telling me things that needed to happen now. I'm not too sure that the bureaucrats sitting in Washington can give the proper response to what those people said to me last night. They're talking to their congressman, they expect their congressman to respond to their dreams and aspirations, and sometimes earmarking is the only way to get that done. So I think it's going to take us just really looking at these communities, listening to the people, and having a system that will allow us to respond faithfully. I'll close with this. The Lake Marion Regional Water Agency I just mentioned, I remember that started with a Jim Clyburn earmark. A lot of people gave me a hard time about that. Some people to this day aren't speaking to me because of that program that we started over 20 years ago. Yet, when the South Carolina went out to try to bid for the new Volvo plant, we were in a contest with Georgia. We won that contest and got the Volvo plant, and the difference was the water. And the water came from the Lake Marion Regional Water Agency. Now everybody's taking claim for the Lake Marion Regional Water Agency, but they didn't want it. But now we got 4,000 people going to work building Volvo plants. They're going to have all the electric and all these battery companies that moved down there to build the batteries for this plant. I suspect there will be 10,000 jobs coming out of that, and it would have gone to Georgia if we did not have the Lake Marion Regional Water Agency that started with a Jim Clyburn earmark.
There you go. So actually that brings me to a question from Hillary Hoynes, who is director of OLAB. She asks, as someone who studies poverty in America, I am encouraged by your attention around the 10-20-30 plan. What are your thoughts on how to best target these funds? You just spoke about the Volvo plant. In particular, she asked, what types of investments do you think could yield the biggest returns in these communities? Should they be targeted at families? Should they be targeted at infrastructure, or at children, or the workforce?
All of the above. The fact of the matter is there are many instances where in small communities, you may focus on the family, but more often than not, the focus would be on the communities. We're talking about communities like in South Carolina, where all those old mines that closed down years ago and poisoned the water table, and children going to school, drinking that water, that when it's tested, the expert says it's unfit for human consumption, but people are drinking it. I mean, this happens in my district. I know of what I speak. In fact, really, when I started the Lake Marion Regional Water Agency, I was more focused on the health of the kids growing up in that area than I was on economic development, because I wanted clean drinking water. So sometimes focusing on the communities like that is a focus on the family. When you've got children consuming that water. So you have to look at it in a holistic way rather than isolating whether it's family or community or trying to develop the workforce.
Thank you. And one aspect of that, I imagine, might be schools. So Mark Steinmeier of the Smith Richardson Foundation, he's senior program officer there for domestic public policy with a major focus in place-based policies resulting in this conference. He asks, I'm curious about your thoughts on how more education funding can be directed to distressed regions. A lot of rural school districts have a hard time recruiting highly qualified teachers. So many younger teachers appear to prefer to live and work in major metropolitan areas. Would you recommend revising the formulas used to distribute Title I funding to give those districts the resources they need to recruit and retain highly qualified teachers?
As you may know, some of you may know, I started my professional career as a public school teacher, teaching in the Charleston, South Carolina community on Charleston's east side, which at that time was the most densely populated area in the state of South Carolina, where none of the students were expected to be successful. You have one of them I was with last night that was in my class, recently retired as general counsel for American Express. So some of them do very well. My second daughter recently retired as a public school teacher. So I believe very strongly that we have to do a better job of funding these schools in what I call high poverty areas and places where they have been neglected. One of the things I found when I first went to teach, they had students ranked from 1 to 20 groups, and they ranked them according to test scores. And the better teachers started from 1 and went all the way down to 20. And the fact of the matter is, it should have been reversed. The better teachers should have been teaching at the 20 and reverse that order, simply because I believe very strongly that we have to direct our resources where the needs are. And if you've got schools that are underfunded, especially in areas where funding for education, as in South Carolina, I don't know about every state, but in South Carolina, our Constitution guarantees a minimally adequate education. And I've been doing a lot of research of late for a book I'm writing now, which I hope to release sometimes next year. And what I have found in all this research is that the attitude toward educating certain people has not been good. It's been intentional. underfunded school districts in low-income areas. Underfunded school districts based upon race and ethnicity has been a practice in this country that's causing a real problem. So sometimes it may be you have to do it at the federal level, but I'm not too sure that this is not an effort that's going to take a holistic approach, state and federal. There needs to be a lot of reform at the state levels.
Thank you. And so with that, we have a question from Jesse Rothstein, who is a professor at UC Berkeley and director of the California Policy Lab. Thinking about the state regulations, maybe that plays a part here that you were just speaking of. He asks, my question relates to some of the things that have been the focus of research on opportunity zones and other similar place-based policies. How do we ensure that when we direct federal money to distressed regions, the money actually increases prosperity for the residents of those regions rather than for investors elsewhere? Is that a real concern? And what kinds of tools or provisions work well to address it?
Absolutely, that's a real concern, a big concern for me. When the opportunity zones, I think it came with the 2017 tax cut bill of the previous president. I raised a lot of alarms about that because I saw in the verbiage good stuff, but I knew from my experiences that a lot of dangers were ahead. And I can take you now to Charleston. I keep going back to Charleston here today. Charleston, South Carolina, when I lived there, and I moved from Charleston in 1971, Charleston, South Carolina was about 42, 43% African American. Today, Charleston, South Carolina is 21% African American. Gentrification on steroids. And what they've done is they've used opportunity zones to create big investment for no more dormitories for the Citadel Medical University, well, not Citadel so much because they're a little different, but Medical University, the College of Charleston, they're building dormitories in what was communities where African Americans live, communities that were basically low-income communities. They put these big, high-rise dormitories in. They wire them for the internet. The developer gets a big tax break from the opportunity zones, and then all the people around them, none of them even got the internet. So I think that we have to really take a hard look at the rules and regulations surrounding these opportunity zones. I'm not a big fan, not because I don't like opportunity zones. I'm a big Jack Kemp person. Now, this is strange for a Democrat to say that, but you all may not remember Jack Kemp, but Jack Kemp started this empowerment zones concept years ago. And I was always a fan of it, and I still am. But there's a lot in the name. What we have to do is look at the practice. And if your emphasis is on giving tax breaks to developers, you're going to have a lot of attraction for people to build and to meet certain demands. But when you look at the communities, the people who live in those communities, I can go into a lot of things. When I saw one big high rise being built in Charleston, South Carolina, and on the top floor was an animal spa. I wonder about those people who were displaced for that high-rise community to be built. So I think that the opportunity zones, the concept is great. Enterprise zones, we had Bill Clinton. We had enterprise zones and empowerment communities. But quite frankly, the way we did it with Bill Clinton was totally different from the way these opportunity zones are being done today. Back then, it was more bottom up. Today, it's top down.
Wonderful. Well, maybe not wonderful. Thank you for that. Might be not quite on the animal spa component.
That's a fact. I mean, I almost went crazy when I saw that.
So maybe to wrap up here, thank you again so much for your time. I wonder if we could step back and also maybe segue into some of the other topics that we're about to discuss on other recent, federal proposals and actual enacted legislation. So Renee Bowen of University of California, San Diego Economics asks, why in your view are distressed communities experiencing persistent poverty, and what do you think will be the key? If in 30 years we've made a big difference, what do you think will be the kind of policy that will have made the most difference in changing those persistent poverty statistics? And do you see CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act being a big part of that?
Sure. The Inflation Reduction Act is going to be huge. It is paying great dividends already. And the impact that it's had on building the pressure, for instance, when in the Inflation Reduction Act, if you recall, we put a cap on insulin, the cost of insulin at $35 a month for people on Medicare. They passed the House with a $35 cap for everybody. The Senate would only go with Medicare. Well, immediately Eli Lilly, right away, says they were going to cap it for everybody. And I think another insulin company did the same thing. These kinds of things, I think, will really drive costs down. My late wife, I lost my wife back in 2019. She fought diabetes for 30 years. I saw her monthly bill, sometimes $800 up to $1,200 a month for insulin. And just think what that will do to people living on fixed income. So the Inflation Reduction Act would have a lot to do. The CHIPS and Science, the jobs that we are bringing back manufacturing jobs we're bringing back. The president was in South Carolina last week. Jennifer Granholm, the secretary, was in South Carolina the week before. These new battery plants, Volkswagen just announced that they're going to build their Scott automobile right outside of Columbia, South Carolina. We now make more tires. We're making more tires in Columbia, in South Carolina now than they make in Ohio. We got BMW, Volvo, Mercedes-Benz, now Scout from VW, when we didn't have anything but BMW before all of this came along. So yeah, these manufacturing jobs will be coming back, and that's what it's going to take for these communities. Let's just remember, these communities did not get this way, as we say down in Gullah Geechee country, just dry along so. These communities fell on hard times because of policies that we have had in place going all the way back to the so-called New Deal. I'm one of those Democrats that I'm not a big fan of the New Deal. In fact, I'm not a fan of the New Deal at all. I'm a Truman Democrat. I'm all for the fair deal. because the New Deal was not fair. The New Deal, as I talked about, when they cultivated, dammed up all those rivers and took all the farmland that these people were working on, not only did they take the jobs away, but the ones who were left working, 65% of African Americans did not qualify for Social Security. They didn't get Social Security. Everybody said that was the biggest anti-poverty program ever created. But 65% of all the African Americans in this country were not allowed on Social Security because it did not cover domestic workers and it did not cover farm workers. That was a deliberate policy that put these people into poverty. And after World War II, soldiers came home for World War II. The policy was the GI Bill we put in place for these men and women who helped to win that war to get settled in their communities for education and home ownership. Yet the GI Bill adopted whites-only policy in a lot of places. Levittown and Daly City, they were white only. But those were the homes built with the GI Bill, or they were purchased with the GI Bill. And so, for instance, in Mississippi, the first 3,000 people that got the GI Bill, of the first 3,000, only 2, not 2%, 2 went to Black people. So all of these things came out of that period of time, and it locked these communities and these families into situations that we still are fighting over today. So these are the things that will have to take place. We have to have policies that are fair, and that's why I've been trying to target these resources in these communities, because these communities need to have the water, the wastewater treatment, all these things that will make it attractive for the CHIPS and Science Act to allow them to get the kinds of manufacturing and job creation that they will need.
Thank you so much, Assistant Leader Clyburn, for the direction, the history, the motivation that, you know, things can move slowly in Congress and then move very quickly. And the direction for, I think, all of us here of the kinds of questions on your mind, on your colleagues' minds, that can motivate research, data collection, and the rest that all of us outside of Washington can do to help guide policy at the state and local level, as well as the federal level, toward the best outcomes for the most people across the great geography of America. So thank you again, once again, for your time, and we really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I hope all of you have a very successful effort.
Thank you.